So as you probably inferred from the intro video of me driving to the airport this morning, today's not a flying day. And if you couldn't tell from that, the absence of wings and engine cowl and nifty things like that should also be an indication that we're not flying today. Today we start, well, actually started a little bit yesterday. But we're starting our annual condition inspection, which I took the 16-hour course. Well, I guess I should back up. With the ELSAs, it's a little bit different than the traditional amateur builds, where if you built at least 51% of the thing and could prove it to the FAA, you would get what's called a repairman certificate, and that would allow you to sign off your own annual condition inspection, which is a huge money saver. They are a lot of work. It takes a lot of time to do well, but they can be very expensive when you're paying somebody $80 to $100 an hour to do it. Now with the ELSA, it's a little bit different. Even though you built it and know more about it than pretty much anybody on the planet, you have to take a 16-hour inspection course, which teaches you how many threads should come out of a lock nut and things like that. It is not airplane specific. It's just basically best practices and such forth. And in my opinion, if you bought this airplane, it's your first airplane, maybe you had nothing to do with building it, 16 hours is not nearly enough to teach you how to do an annual. But it is what it is. I had to take the course. Anybody else can take the course. So I'm starting my annual condition inspection. Give you an idea of the scope of this thing. This is some of the stuff I've already taken out of the airplane. Those are partial liters of oil that I'll use to, when I change the oil. I've got 3 new liters on order. The ELT is out. This was the year that the ELT needed a new battery, and that's not cheap. That's $185. But they're good for about 6 years. So, you know, it's 30 bucks a year, 31 bucks a year, something like that. So whatever. This is actually the mount that usually holds my GoPro when you watch my flying videos. These are the little anti-vibration washers on there that don't look like they would do much, but they seem to do pretty well. And then these are parts that are out of the airplane. This is the filler neck. This is Pro Seal. You put that on there to keep it from seeping down the sidewalls of the airplane. It hasn't always worked. I do have fuel stains down the interior sidewalls of the airplane from where it got a little bit loose. That all has to be cleaned off before it goes back on, and then a new Pro Seal gasket will be made at the time. This is an early serial number. I'm serial number 284. Sometime after I built mine, the vans started including nut plates so that you didn't have to have somebody hold the nut, because what you're basically trying to do, there are screws that go right there, and on the other side, inside, there are nuts that hold those screws. So you really can't reach both at the same time. So it takes 2 people, in my case, to get that thing out of there. One of my little projects I might do during this particular annual is get 6 nut plates and drill some holes and rivet some in there so I don't have to do that anymore. I got my prop hub. This is the prop hub to satisfy permanently the service bulletin on the Sensenich propeller, so I've got that. I also ordered from Vans. They have a new way, new to me anyway, keep in mind I'm an older serial number. They have a new way of having you mark your position on the propeller. It's just a little metal tab that'll sit down on here somewhere, and it has a little slot, so you can make sure first thing you do is level the propeller. And we'll go through this when I do it, but the little thing goes on here to make sure that you're measuring from the exact same point on both blades. Now, I got that tool. It was an $8 tool, which is not horrible. I got that thing a month ago because I didn't anticipate the lengthy delay on the prop hub. So the prop hub arrived. I got Pete down here, who's the guy that helped me build the latter half of the airplane. Got him all the way down here to go ahead and do this replacement, and could not find that tool anywhere. Searched for it for an hour and a half or so. Couldn't find it anywhere. I knew at some point it was starting to get rusty. I put it away so that it wouldn't get lost. I put it someplace where I wouldn't lose it. And of course, we spent an hour and a half not finding it. This has happened before with me and Pete. I had some headset jacks. I replaced some of the headset jacks to fix that grounding problem that was giving such terrible audio on the YouTubes. And I couldn't find the damn thing. So as soon as I ordered new ones, I found the old ones. Well, the new tool is still on order, but this morning I found the old tool hiding right in there. So true to form, as soon as I order the new one, the old one is found. So I've got the back bulkheads off. This is part of the bottom cowling that'll get cleaned up. That's just stuff to do the prop, the repitching. Since I'm going to loosen those bolts, it'll have to be repitched. So that's what I've done so far. I did get the fuel tank out, which required draining the tank. which I do through the gascolator, and which every now and then causes a great spill. And that kind of white scruffy area is where I tried to clean up the gas stain with kitty litter because I tried to keep the floor clean. That was mostly my own fault. I did find a problem. When I took the fuel tank out, I think I have that floorboard out somewhere. No, it's probably in here. One of the floorboards underneath the tank was showing some fuel stains, and I had noticed maybe the last 2 or 3 flights that there was a smell of gas. I sometimes get the smell of gas when the tank is full because of the aforementioned gap that I had in this so-called gasket. I could smell the fuel a little bit whenever the tank was full, but it was getting to be more than that, and it was getting to be all the time. So I wasn't super surprised to find a little fuel stain. This is not a leak, it's what I would call a seep. It's going to be nightmarishly difficult to find. I have a hint, pretty good hint, that it's right in this area here. See that little gap right there? You can see some of the grunge from the fuel. It leaves kind of a brown stain, and if you put 100 low lead in it, it leaves a nice blue stain, which makes it much easier to find. The indications on the floor underneath the tank was that it was around this area. You can kind of see it on the side of the tank. So what I'm thinking is I'm probably just going to dig that Pro Seal out of there. I don't want to open the tank unless I absolutely have to. So I'll try to dig that out of there and put some new Pro Seal in it and hope for the best. I'll leak check it before I put in because it would be silly not to. And I have my highfalutin leak tech. This is my leak discovering stuff. You just slop a little on that on there. There's a little balloon that goes on the top of the tank, and it puts very light air pressure on that, enough to create bubbles if it's leaking. Hopefully that will be enough to fix it because I really don't want to mess around with it any more than that. So I've already got the cowling off. That's actually a pretty straightforward job. I haven't really started any inspection yet. I'll spend a lot of time up here. This is where I start. I'll have to get the spark plugs out of there, which is not difficult to do. I've got the tools pretty much all laid out, tools I've been using. And then I'm laid out for the engine stuff because there are a couple things you need to do. Here's that tool for doing the propeller, tool number 2. Safety wire pliers, because I'll be doing an oil change and other things that'll probably get de-safety wired. This is a fishing scale, which will be combined with this little threaded rod, and that goes into the side of the Rotax, and it locks the clutch somehow, and you actually are checking basically the spring back on the clutch or something. There's a number in pounds of resistance you should get when it's going back against this thing. So what this does is goes on the propeller, you tug on it, you get a kind of a number when that clutch actually disengages and actually moves through. That clutch is very important. It protects the engine if you have a prop strike or anything like that. So that's worth testing. There was a service bolt, and this is a recurring service bolt and I can live with because it's very, very simple. You take out the magnetic plug on the side of the engine, and this thing has a slot in it, and you put that in, and then this little tab goes in the slot, and there's a line on here where it should stop. And if it doesn't stop, you have a broken gear in the PTO, the power takeoff, which is actually not used in my installation, but it's still something you'd probably have to fix. This is the fancy spark plug removable socket. It's a 16mm deep socket. That's what it takes to get those out of there. This is where the level will be when we finally find it and put it back where it belongs. This is to measure the diameter of the holes where the wing pins go in, and I can tell you right now that it's just fine because those pins are still harder than hell to get in and out. So that bushing's not getting stretched out at all. This is the stuff that goes on the spark plugs when they go back into Rotax. It is not anti-seize like you used to have on a Lycoming. It's a heat sink, a silicone heat sink, and that's what goes on the spark plugs. And that's in case I take off anything that's been Loctited. So we're about ready to go, really. Like I said, I'll start with the engine. I'll do a compression check. I'll remove the plugs, do a compression check. I'll do a whole lot of looking around. I like to look very, very closely at all this complicated stuff on the carburetors. You'll note that I have found things come loose on here before that are now safety wired that didn't used to be. I've safety wired the choke cables. I safety wire the throttle cable. Everything is safety wired now. Most of it already was, but I think that this one was, the day I found one of those loose was I thought, man, I probably ought to safety wire that as well. So here it all is. The other thing I'll be looking for but not be able to find, here's where the prop hub is going to go. You can tell it's a bad one because it's nylon insert. If you have that, you have a bad hub. The other thing I wanted to look at is I get a little bit of seepage right here. Now if I fly about, this is probably from about an hour and a half of flying, I get this little bit of oil and no idea where it's coming from. I've looked everywhere for it. I thought maybe here because I put this quick drain on there, but that quick drain on there has been on there since day one. I mean, I've never flown without it. The other thing that happened, and was kind of coincident with the time that this started occurring, I moved the oil pressure sensor up to the firewall to keep it from blowing up as much as they were, and it seems to have worked, but In any event, that fitting right there could be the culprit, but I've got that as tight as I can get it, and I really worry about putting it in any tighter. I really don't want to force the issue. I used to have what I call the JOMT methodology, which is just one more turn. And I stopped doing that the day I broke a gasculator, because that one more turn was one turn too many. So we'll be looking around up here. We do an engine inspection. This thing here, newer RV12s, I think don't come with that. That's a plenum to push some air down the cylinder sides, because as we know, the Rotax 912 is only water cooled up here. It's air cooled down on the cylinder sides. I have heard, and I don't know if it's to do with the fuel injected engine or if it's true across all new RV12s, that they don't do this anymore. And I guess that's fine. I mean, I don't care if I have it. I'm not going to take it off. It's a royal bitch to get it on there. Actually, one of the first things you do with this engine, this very, very expensive engine, one of the first things you do when you start working on it during the build is take parts of it off. You take off the water pump and clock it over in a different direction, and you take off the whole top end to put on this plenum. So it's not coming off of there whether they want it on there or not. Just not going to happen. So I've got the floorboards off. This is mostly, I get down in here and what I'm looking for is loose nuts. About 3 years ago I found a loose nut on the autopilot servo. So I pay very, very, very close attention to that. Here's kind of a tour down here. I got this in here. I had this in here to keep a screw from dropping in, because they're just very difficult to get out of there. But here's how your ailerons work. They just go across that push bar. And this is the flaperon mixer. Let's see if I can find that on the camera. There it is. That's how the flaperons work. If you put the flaps down, that big bar pushes that mixer back, but it still acts as flaperons. Your elevator cables are right down here somewhere. I'm going to give those a quick look. Well, not a quick look. I really want to borrow a tensiometer and get a good check on them, because they didn't get done last year. They got checked the year before. One, I did the service bolt, and I could tell that they're tight. They're not slack in the least, but I do want to get that. I'm going to borrow the tensiometer from the last guy I borrowed from last time. They're actually inordinately expensive for what they are, so that's something I tend to borrow. And then I've got the back bulkhead off. I'll want to get back there and kind of just make sure everything looks good. There's a little Teflon stab cable sits on it. You're probably gonna have trouble seeing it. It's a little white Teflon slide for that cable to slide across, and if that wears, you have to flip that over and use the other side. So there's not a whole lot to see in there, but you do want to check your wiring and everything. And again, I'll dust it out and get everything nice and cleaned up. That mallet, that was from repairing something that I did wrong when I first built the airplane. I put in a cap screw that should have been a flush screw. So I took that mallet and tapped on a dimple, just a dimple enough to put a flat screw in there. So it worked out well, and it should be okay. It was a stupid mistake to make, I'll admit that, but it did take a long time to find, so not really causing any problems. But saw a little wear on the screw head and wondered what was going on, and oh, it's the wrong screw head. So that's taken care of. For people that watch my flying videos, you'll be happy to know that this is one time when I actually do clean the canopy. Whether it's really needs it or not, I will clean the canopy. I try not to clean it too much. You can see, maybe you can see, very, very easy to scratch. I don't know if people are seeing that. You're going to see most of your reflections and such. Very easy to scratch, and cleaning too much, you get these little micro scratches in there that end up being fog or haze when you turn into the sun, you know, like on a evening when you're landing to the west. So brake pads are not due. The brake pads have some room left on them, but when it's all taken apart like this, it's not that hard of a job. I've got the jacks out. I'm going to go ahead and jack it up and probably put on new brake pads. I need to get those on order. The way I jack the airplane has changed significantly. I don't lift it up on the sawhorses anymore because it takes two people to do that. I now use these big scissor jacks, and these work really, really well. These are actually stabilizer jacks for a gigantic RV camper. So they're not made to lift a multi-thousand-pound camper, but they will lift a 700-pound airplane. So that's how I do my jacking now. Like I said, the fuel tank is out. Not much going to happen on that except the Pro Seal. And I haven't even started looking back here. There may be things that I find back here. All of this stuff was off for the service pull just a few months ago, so it should be okay. But I'll have Pete take off that tail cone. Pete built the tail cone. I let him do some fiberglass work during the build. He built the tail cone, so when he comes out to help on the annual, that tail cone is going to be his job. Frankly, because I hate the thing. I just hate it. It's flimsy. When you're trying to get the screws in and out, it feels like you're going to break it because it's so flimsy, and I just don't like dealing with it. But you know, if I didn't have Pete, I'd do it. But I do have Pete, so he'll do it. So that's where we stand. I'll give you some updates a little bit later. This is, like I said, this is just getting started. this is probably going to take a full week, mostly because I am inherently lazy. I was born lazy and I never got better. So I'll work on this, 3-4 hours a day. I've been out here a couple hours already today. So there's the wings on their nice little rack. It's so easy to pull the wings out. 5 minutes at the most to pull the wings out. And when they're out, there's lots of room for my Ohio Speedboat. So I got my little Ohio Speedboat there, which is got a 30-pound thrust trolley motor on it. It's not fast at all, but it's better than walking on water. So there you are. First things first, and the first thing is one of the most onerous, which is cleaning the belly. And now the Rotex doesn't throw a lot of oil, it doesn't pump out a lot of soot, but it still does get dirty under here. And what I clean it off with is Simple Green degreaser. I used to use a harsher degreaser. That's why I wear these, because when you're sitting underneath that stuff, you don't have a lot of control where that mist goes. So I try to keep it out of my eyes as much as possible. But it does a pretty good job. Like I said, it's not a heavy coat of anything under here, but it does get a light mist. And the paint's expensive. You gotta take care of your paint. Outrageously expensive. I paid $9,000 for this paint job, and I think it was 2 years later, maybe another RV12 went to the same paint shop, wanted a simple, I think red or yellow, single coat of paint or single color paint, $14,500. I think for the yellow and maybe the red. One was more expensive than the other. I think the cheapest was $12,000. So, man, has it gotten expensive painting airplanes. So I just kick myself every time I put any kind of little nick or dent in this thing, which I do every now and then, but I do try to keep the belly clean as much as I can. It doesn't get too dirty because it doesn't sit outside, so really it's the belly that gets messy, and the bottoms of the wings. If I land on a grass runway and it happens to be wet, it'll spray up some mud and gunk up onto the bottom of the wings. Those are very easy to clean because they're sitting over on that rack, so I can just walk up and clean those. The rest of this is a lot of creeping back, and it's better than the RV6. On the RV6, as the further back you went, the closer it was to the ground until you couldn't get under it anymore. This one actually goes the other way. It actually lifts away from you, so it gets easier as I go further to the back. So this is going to take a good 20 minutes, but something we got to do. Swinging back to the engine for a minute, I should probably point out that this is the year. This is 5 years since the engine started, so this is the year I would have been replacing these fuel lines. If I had the original fuel lines that came from Vans, they had a 5-year life limit on them. I think, I'm stressing that, because they were rubber, surrounded with this fire sleeve, and that because this is an ethanol engine, an ethanol fuel running engine, I think the ethanol over 5 years can probably dry out those rubber lines and make them brittle. Now that may happen with any rubber fuel line, that may happen with leaded fuel, I don't know. But in any event, I have replaced mine. I replaced them actually first year I had the thing with Teflon hoses with the fire shield, and those have no life limit whatsoever. And I have heard, and I believe this to be true, it was a reputable source that says Vans lines as they ship today, if you were to start building today, you too would have the Teflon lines and not have that 5-year change. And it's important because those lines are about, I've heard, like $800. Now the ones I replaced them with were $600, but $800 for 5 years versus $600 forever made perfect sense to me. And it wasn't even a difficult installation. I think they've modified it even since then. They don't take away the Vans banjo bolt and replace it with this 4-way. I think they found a way to even keep the original banjo bolt in place, which I don't know what the benefits are other than a little bit more simplicity or staying a little bit closer to stock. I'm not sure, but I'm not in any hurry to retrofit mine. So this would have been the year. Fortunately, I don't have to do that. I'm happy about that in a very, very big way. So there you go. Also worth mentioning is that annual time is also hangar cleaning time. I clean it twice a year, more or less. I straighten stuff up, by which I mean hiding it in drawers. And I sweep the floor, by which I mean, well, sweeping the floor. I always like working back here in the back of the hangar because there's a reminder on the wall back here of my first airplane, which was not a home built, it was store-built airplane, or a store-bought airplane. So I couldn't do much maintenance on it, but there were things I could do, and there were things I needed to remember. So I created myself a little whiteboard to help me remember this stuff. And it always makes me laugh because my daughter was very, very young back then, and So we had Daddy's side of the whiteboard. Engine overhaul was going to be due at 4045. Annual was due on the it's 2003. That's how long ago that was. Oil change, blah 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 blah. All that stuff is. This is how I kept track of it. And then never erased it because I got rid of that airplane. And the other reason I don't erase it is because I really enjoy what my daughter put on here. I love to fly. Do you? I love to fly with my dad. I love to fly with my mom. Parenthetically, she doesn't fly. So she did fly. She did fly once or twice. It just wasn't all that common. And then here's where the room I left myself when I was trying to track oil changes on the RV6. So at this point, basically it's just a museum piece, but I really enjoy it. Now, while I'm waiting for the oil to arrive, I'm going ahead and draining the oil that's already in it because the engine hasn't been run. I guess I could have put on a preheater to heat up that oil. It takes a while to come out when it's I don't want to say cold, it's not operating temperature, it's probably 70 some degrees, but it's sluggish coming out of there. And it comes out fairly quick at first, but getting it all out of there takes a while. And I want to get out as much as I can because I'm probably going to be removing the tank, the oil tank, and cleaning it out. I do that every other year. I was doing it every year when I was running leaded fuel because it collects a lot more gunk in there. The unleaded fuel seems to not capture as much lead in the oil because there's none there. But I still clean it out every other year just because. And I'm just going to let this sit and go for a few days, probably until tomorrow, until it's fully. I'm not going to stand here and wait for it. Still waiting for new filters and everything to arrive anyway. I hadn't been able to empty this catch pan for quite a while. The FBO here at Bolton moved out and a new one moved in, and I've not been able to find. They don't have a mechanic shop is the difference. They had a mechanic shop here before. And they had a big 55-gallon drum you could dump your oil into. Now what I have to do is take it up to AutoZone, which is very generous of AutoZone. You just sign a little sheet saying, yes, I'm a customer and I'm not just somebody working here that wants to dump oil or something. Or I'm going to start getting mails from them. I don't know which way. It doesn't matter. But they'll let me dump out all that oil for free, which is really, really nice. And actually, it's even easier than doing it myself. You just hand it to the guy. He takes it and dumps it out. So he's the one who has to stand for it and wait for it to all glug, glug, glug out of there. So it worked out really well. I am a customer there, so it's not like I'm just coming in when I want something. But that's a pretty nice service. There's probably other things they do that I'm unaware of that don't really matter to airplanes. But in any event, this is going to drain overnight. I should get the filter and such forth tomorrow. I have oil if I want to put it in. I just don't have a filter yet, so it's not going to stay in very well without the filter. Most of it will stay in, but not all of it. It'll be an easy oil change because I've got the cowls off. Normally I only take off the top cowl, and I have to reach down there and get at that oil filter. I've got the bottom cowl off today, so that's going to be much, much easier. And what really matters, the difficulty in it is not so much getting it out of there. It's getting it out of there without spilling out the half of a load. It probably has oil sitting right up to this level. And then it wants to drip down the engine, and it drips down to the firewall, then it drips down to the belly, and we've seen how little I like cleaning the belly. So I always try to get that out of there without spilling any of it, and it's a lot easier when it's not crammed down inside that lower cowl. Now you could say, why don't you take off the lower cowl every time you do this just so you don't have that problem? Well, that turns out to be a bigger pain than getting some rag stuff down there, and I have a little catch jar I stuff down in there just to catch that oil. So even when I do spill it, I capture 90-some% of it, and it's just driblets that get to the bottom. So there it is. We'll be back tomorrow to finish that up, and probably when the oil filter comes, some of the other stuff I'm waiting for is also going to come with it, the spark plugs and all that. So I'll replace the spark plugs, do the compression check, all fun stuff like that tomorrow. What with oil being much harder to clean off of the floor than gasoline or basically anything but paint, I've got a couple levels of redundancy here for catching any of that oil that comes out of there. I tried to get the filter out and vertically oriented quickly enough that not much spills out, but it always does a little bit. So I'll catch it in either one of these buckets. It's hard to tell where it's going to run. It doesn't necessarily go straight down. Sometimes it'll wick along the bottom of the filter, or it could wick along down through here. So it may end up being a mess. It's kind of random whether I can do this clean or not. I also hold a rag under there too to catch some of it that starts to come out. So the whole idea is just to try to keep the floor in the airplane clean. Well, speaking of faulty memory, I thought these were actual instructions, but no, this is go watch a video. Okay, that's kind of irritating. Okay, so I went and watched the 10-minute video, which is 9.5 minutes of jabber. and 30 seconds of how to actually do this procedure. And it's exactly as I remembered it, so well, pardon my fingers, but I'm reaching in front of the camera. So this little guy goes in here, and he goes this way. It's in a little vertical. Can you see that? You can see that. See that edge? That has to be vertical. And if you don't have that vertical, the test isn't going to work right. And then you take the little magic popsicle stick here, and it goes into this tiny, tiny little slot. Yeah, look how easy that goes. It goes easily into that tiny, tiny little slot. I thought the hint would help. Okay, now we're back to vertical. And then you push it in until you feel resistance. And there's resistance. And at that point, you want to be able to see that little line. I don't have that in all the way, I don't think. There we go. You want to be able to see that little line, right? And we can see that. And then you push a little more. Oops. Well, here's what happens. That's what happens. If you let it get sideways, it's going to rush right on in there. You don't want that. You're going to get a false indication. So now I'm pushing on it. Ow, damn it. It's sharper than shit. Pardon the language. And it's still, I can still see that line. I wonder if that's going to bleed. It might. Oh well. It's the risks of airplane ownership. So that's good. We'll sign that service bulletin off for another year. Okay. I'm going to drop that if I'm not careful. There we go. See, that's why you have a bucket there. Exactly that reason. Okay. Oh, rats. Gonna have to go find some duct tape and patch that up. Well, there's the answer to that question. Looks like it is going to bleed, so I'm going to have to go make a hanger bandage, which is basically duct tape and one of those Glad rags over there. Make a nice big fat bandage. Okay. A little delay while I patch myself up. Okay, there's our nicely newly cleaned magnetic plug. It's my experience that it's a good idea to put this back right away. If you don't, and you start filling the airplane with oil and you try to prop it on through into the sump and all that, blah, 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 it's all going to leak right back out. So we're going to go ahead and get that in place. I'm trying to do it left-handed. I'll show you why I'm trying to do it left-handed. This is what a hanger band-aid looks like. It's masking tape and a little bit of tissue. Makes it hard to do anything with that finger, especially unlock my iPhone. So video is getting a little more painful now that I got to dial in my code. It won't recognize masking tape as a fingerprint. So I'm going to get that back in there and get it safety wired. It's kind of a cranky safety wiring job. Rotax drills the hole for you. Where's my camera lens? There it is. They drill you the hole for the safety wire, but they give you nothing to wire to other than this bolt, and I don't think that's its intent. So I always struggle to find a good way to safety wire this in. And I do typically end up doing it around that bolt. And it's actually fairly hard to do with the bottom cowl on. It's only slightly hard to do with the cowl off. It's hard either way, but it's less hard this way because I have a little more access. And I'll also go ahead and get the oil filter on there. There's no reason to wait on that either. So that's going to be the next few steps. I went ahead and did some looking around to see if I can find a better place to safety wire this oil filter. And there are down here, there's a couple little lugs right there that could, and obviously have been, used for safety wiring, but putting it way down there is one, it's going to guarantee that I have to take the bottom cowl off next time I try to change the oil filter, which I could live with. Yeah, maybe I could, maybe I couldn't. It's easy to say now. The other is, I mean, it's just an awful lot of wire, and it's really not going to do what I want it to do. I want it to keep this, I want it to help this resist from turning. When this turns, if it tries to turn loose, I want that safety wire pull in the other direction. And this being kind of a straight shot, it's going to get quite about a turn before it really snugs up enough to stop, turning. So what I'm going to try this time, I've threaded this through. I got myself my little, I got these from the surgical tool aisle at Harbor Freight, which I believe is where my surgeon shops. I'm just running that. I use these to kind of pull the safety wire through those holes drilled in the magnetic plug, which is itself safety wired. So it's not going anywhere because it's safety wire. So it's going to provide a nice spot over here. See how that's kind of at an angle now? That's going to keep that from rotating counterclockwise once I get it into that little tab right there. So we'll see how it goes. I can't see why that wouldn't work, and it certainly looks a lot easier. So going to give it a try. If I'm wrong, please, feel free to comment. That's what the comment section is there for. Not abusively. I'm very sensitive. Okay. Yeah. So let me know if you think that's a stupid idea. I'm probably going to try it anyway because honestly, as hard as these things are to get off, I can't imagine what the safety wire is supposed to prevent. That little mark right there is, you know, the way these are installed, you hand screw them onto there until that gasket just touches right there, and then you go another 3/4 of a turn. So I put a Sharpie marker up here, which now, having turned 3/4 of the way, is right there. So that's very precise. And that's intended to keep it from being really difficult to get off of there when I need to. And of course, the safety wires going to ensure that it doesn't come off, you know, too soon of its own volition, if you will. So there it is. I'm not 100% sure I love it, but I'm also not 100% sure I hate it. It looks like it's going to do what I need it to do. It's just a little bit different. The only difference is it's here instead of up here. I mean, really, that's what I've been doing all along. This seems a little more solid because up here it's just kind of looped around. Here it's actually going through a hole, which is really nice. So there it is. So that's pretty much it for the oil change, except for removing the tank and cleaning out the sludge, if there is any, and I don't think there will be. Oh, and another thing you always want to remember to do is make sure you've closed this when you're done. Do not forget to do that. You want to close that so when you're putting the new oil in, it's not coming right back out. So I'll do that here in a minute, and then get that tank off of there for a look-see. This seems to be the year for trying new things. I'm wondering why I would go ahead and put this back on here and pour 3 liters of oil through that relatively small hole rather than just dump it in right now in that really, really gigantic hole right there. It's not a big deal. I mean, if I'm worried about spilling, I can always use the artfully named Funnel McFunnel Face. He would do that for me if I needed him to, but I think I'm just going to go ahead and dump it right on in. I can't see any reason not to. And there it is, all put back together. Got a little bit of what I call collateral damage. It's inevitable. As you're moving things around, you're going to bump something and break it. This wire, this is a ground wire that used to fit into that terminal. It's a dedicated ground wire for the voltage regulator, which sits right back here. Vans has since moved the voltage regulator into the cockpit, which I guess protects it from the elements a little bit, but it also puts it in a position of where it does start throwing smoke. It's throwing it right in your face, not on the other side of a firewall. So I haven't moved mine, and I probably won't. But part of the problem with the voltage regulators, they were dying. They were dying in not nearly enough time to justify their costs. I think mine, I'm not sure I made 100 hours on it. I think it might have been 85 hours. In any event, I talked to a Rotax guy at Sun and Fun, and he says, well, it's not really the regulator that's the problem. It's not the Rotax that's the problem. It's that trusting, just bolting that thing onto this, which I guess is aluminum, but it feels like it's almost treated with something. Just it's a press fit to create the ground. And it's the same problem I had with the headset jacks. I had to put a dedicated ground wire on these headset jacks because they just weren't grounding well at all. And Rotax guy says what happens is it loses that ground through vibration, and it may even just be momentary, but it still is not regulating voltage for that period of time. It gets hot and probably burns up. I think people have opened them up and found that there were burned components in there, so that may be what's causing it. So better safe than sorry, and it was dirt cheap to do. I just ran a dedicated ground wire out here. This is the easiest place to find ground, right here. So I just need to put that terminal back on, put a new terminal on that and bolt it in. It's not a big deal at all. I'm glad I noticed it. I would have noticed it during the inspection portion, but might as well get it done now. Okay, well, on to the next thing now that the oil's done, and that's scraping this old gasket material off the filler neck, which I feel like I should be sitting on my front porch whittling a piece of wood. Which always reminds me of a MASH episode where I think it was a Korean guy was whittling through most of the half-hour episode, and when it was finally done, it looked like a 2x4, and that's what Hawkeye said. He told us, "Hey, it looks like a 2x4." He says, "Thank you. Used to be round." So this is still round, and I'm hoping not to shape it into a rectangular shape like a 2x4, but this is going to take a while. So here's a pro tip for you, and the pro tip is not try soaking that gasket off of there in MEK substitute. The pro tip is don't use MEK substitute when you have an open cut on your finger, because if any of it gets in there, it really kind of burns. Ask me how I know. Well, we have a little unforecast rain here in the background. It's gonna get kind of loud. Hangar is loud when it's rainy. So we're getting ready to replace the prop hub, which means repitching the propellers. It means ensuring that the propellers stay within the pitch that I want, and blah blah blah. So in any event, what we're doing right now is just kind of setting a level. This is it right now, 0 degrees, and I'm going to measure the current pitch of each blade because I want to come back to that as close as I can, because it took a while to get it set the way I want it, and if I want it, I want it. So I'm going to check those numbers and see if we can get back to where we started from here a little bit in the future. So this is the angle of the first blade, 73.1. So now I'm going to roll it 180 degrees around, get it level again, and measure the other side, and hopefully it's somewhere near 73.1, but somewhere in that 73 degree range. That's going to be our target for when we put it back together. And here's the other side. It's 73.4, so very, very close. Probably not the tolerance I'm after. I'm probably going to try to get it down to 0.0, as close as I can anyway. But that gives me a goal for resetting them to the exact pitch that I want, and then all I got to do is make them match up so that they're not, you know, pulling, one pulling more than the other or one pulling less than the other. It makes kind of a vibration and a thrumming sound sometimes, so whatever. Okay, so I'm just going to loosen up that hub and get the new old hub off and the new hub on, and then we'll go through this again. I've gone ahead and started loosening up these bolts even before my extra hands get here. And you can see these are the original bolts. These are ones that came with the kit. And they've been on and off a number of times, and they're starting to get kind of roundy and nasty looking. And these washers under here, they're called Nordlock washers, and they're kind of weird. You can see they have a little pattern on the outside, those little small grooves. On the inside, they have actually even bigger step grooves, and I'll get you a close-up of these in a minute. And it's important to remember that the small grooves go out on both sides, and the large grooves or shelves or plateaus or levers or ramps or whatever, those meet on the inside, and you'll be able to see that with a bare washer. Now, I would not really want to put these washers and bolts back in here because they've been in and out, and every time I loosen these, I can feel these washers, you know, rubbing against each other, and they feel like they're a soft, almost lead-like metal, and that those little shelves are going to wear away, and I believe they're there to keep these from backing out, which you don't want to have happen. So fortunately, when they sent me my $195 prop hub, they sent new bolts and washers as well, so that's a wonderful thing. So we'll be getting brand new hardware in here in just a few minutes. Oh, let me go over here and show you these washers as long as we're talking about it. As long as I can find them. I'll lose them eventually. They should be in here where I left them. And here's the new bolts, and you can see these are much prettier. These are much better condition because obviously they're brand new, so they're not getting all roundy on the corners and such. And then these Nordlock washers, these are the most bizarre thing. So here's the outside. Those are the outside ridges, and then if I separate this pair, if I can separate this pair with one hand, becoming doubtful. There we go. There's the bigger shelves or ridges or whatever you want to call them. So those meet in the middle and kind of mesh against each other, as you would expect. And then these kind of grab a hold of the nut and the plate underneath them. So that's what that's all about. I'm gonna go ahead and get it all taken apart. Oh, there's Pete. Hey, oh, look what Pete brought. We're not gonna do good work. Or is that until later? That's for when we're done, right? Right?
Yeah, that's for when we're done.
Yeah, before the test flight. Okay.
It's an emergency.
So this is the old hub, and you can see where the weakness came from. See how that swales down right there? That's where the cracks were forming. Here's the new hub, nice and flat across there. So more material, probably not as many stress risers. They probably got stress risers just from these little those little measuring ticks they put in there. So could have been anything. So this one's trash. This one goes back on the airplane. This is so I don't get them mixed up.